Indo-Pacific seems to be everywhere these days.
Yeah.
And it's not just some trendy phrase, it
right.
really points to a big global shift.
Mm-hmm.
The fastest growing economies,
Yeah.
the biggest jump in military spending anywhere in the world,
Mm-hmm.
intense competition for resources, strategic flashpoints,
Mm-hmm.
you name it.
Absolutely.
This region could really be make or break for the future of global security.
Yeah.
So in this deep dive, we're going to try to break down why this region is suddenly so crucial, what's driving these rising tensions,
Right.
and who the major players are. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Okay.
When we talk about the Indo-Pacific, what exactly are we talking about?
Well, geographically, it's a huge area.
Yeah.
It stretches way beyond just the Indian and Pacific Oceans.
Okay.
It goes from eastern Africa all the way to the west coast of the U.S.,
Wow.
encompassing 40 countries.
Okay.
And it's not even just about physical location. Globalization and trade and, shifting relationships have all kind of woven this web of interconnectedness that goes beyond those traditional borders.
40 countries.
Yeah.
That's a lot to keep track of.
It is.
Australia, New Zealand, India, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Thailand, just to name a few.
Yeah.
It's massive.
Yeah.
And I have to ask, with all of this going on, what's really driving the tension?
Well, China's rise is a major factor.
Okay.
This emergence as a global powerhouse, economically, technologically, militarily, and politically, has got a lot of nations on edge.
Okay.
And it's not just their economic influence.
Okay.
One of our sources mentioned, for example, Chinese scientists developing laser-propelled submarines.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Laser-propelled submarines.
Yeah.
That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And if they can pull this off, these submarines could be so much faster and stealthier
Wow.
than anything currently in use.
Yeah.
Imagine what that means for naval warfare.
That's a game changer.
It is a potential game changer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I can see why some countries might be a little nervous.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is just one example.
Yeah.
China's securing energy resources, boosting trade ties, and building up its military presence throughout the region.
Yeah.
And all of this is causing anxiety among its neighbors.
Especially when you think about how strategically important the Indo-Pacific is.
Exactly.
It's the most important trade route in the world.
It is.
50% of global trade.
Yeah.
40% of the world's oil passes through these waters.
Absolutely. Not to mention the South China Sea,
Right.
which is rich in resources, but also strategically vital.
Yeah.
It's a major flashpoint in the region.
Speaking of the South China Sea, I read that 80% of China's energy imports and almost 40% of its total trade flows through those waters.
Wow. That's a huge chunk of their economic activity,
Yeah.
which explains why they're so determined to assert their dominance there.
Okay.
They have these historical claims based on what they call the 9-dash line, but Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei all have competing claims, and this is creating a very volatile situation.
With all these countries vying for power and influence in this incredibly important region, what moves are they making?
Well, there was a major naval symposium, the Western Pacific Naval Symposium,
Okay.
with 30 countries participating.
Wow.
Sounds like things were pretty tense.
30 countries
Yeah.
with so much on the line.
Mm-hmm.
That must have been an interesting meeting.
Yeah.
What were some of the key takeaways?
One thing that's fascinating is that they spent a lot of time discussing what's called CUES,
Right.
which stands for Code for Unplanned Encounters at Sea.
Okay.
It's essentially a set of guidelines
Okay.
designed to prevent, misunderstandings and accidents between naval vessels.
So like a rule book
Yeah.
to avoid bumping into each other,
Yeah.
literally and figuratively.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
And while that might seem like a minor point,
Yeah.
it really highlights just how sensitive the situation is.
Yeah.
One wrong move could escalate things very quickly.
And speaking of escalating things, I read about a trilateral summit between the U.S., Japan, and the Philippines.
Right.
They issued this joint statement expressing serious concerns about what they called China's dangerous and aggressive behavior in the South China Sea.
And China didn't waste any time pushing back,
Right.
calling it bloc politics,
Okay.
and viewing these alliances as attempts to contain their influence.
Mm-hmm.
It shows just how differently these countries see this situation unfolding.
I remember Biden reassured the Philippines that U.S. defense commitments were ironclad.
Yeah,
That's strong language.
that's pretty strong language.
What are the implications of that?
Well, it's significant because any attack on the Philippines would likely trigger the U.S. Mutual Defense Treaty,
Right.
meaning the U.S. would be obligated to come to their aid.
Right.
raising the stakes considerably.
And then there's AUKUS, the alliance between Australia, the UK, and the US.
Yeah,
That seems like it was really catalyzed by China's rise, wouldn't you say?
absolutely. China's growing influence has pushed these countries to join forces.
It seems like each country has their own motivations.
Right.
The US wants to reinforce its presence.
Yeah,
The UK wants a bigger role on the world stage, and Australia feels particularly vulnerable.
absolutely. AUKUS's goals are to counter China's power,
Okay.
to boost regional security, and collaborate on advanced military technologies.
Speaking of technologies, they're not playing around.
No?
I read that they're working on quantum computing applications, artificial intelligence, hypersonic weapons, and undersea capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
This is some seriously advanced stuff.
Exactly, which is why China is so concerned.
Yeah.
They've warned that AUKUS could trigger a regional arms race.
It's an unsettling thought.
It is.
We can't forget about Taiwan. It's another major point of tension,
Ooh,
wouldn't you
yeah.
say?
Yeah, China considers Taiwan a breakaway province and has made it very clear that any country recognizing Taiwan's sovereignty risks facing their wrath.
And their actions speak louder than words. Recently, Taiwan spotted Chinese drones circling the Protus Islands and responded by issuing warnings and increasing patrols with F-16s. Things seem to be escalating quickly.
This incident is just one example of China's increasingly assertive actions around Taiwan.
Right.
They've been ramping up military activity, including sending warplanes near the island. It's a very tense situation.
Yeah.
It could easily spiral out of control.
We've mainly focused on the South China Sea,
Right.
but the tension extends beyond that.
Absolutely.
What's happening in the Indian Ocean?
Well, the Indian Ocean is another critical area
Okay.
where China is expanding its influence. And the Maldives is a prime example.
Okay.
The Maldives' strategic significance stems from its location
Okay.
on key shipping lanes that are vital for China's energy supplies.
So both China and the U.S. are vying for influence there.
They are.
Another arena for this great power competition.
Exactly. And the decisions made by the Maldives leadership could have a ripple effect on the geopolitical balance in the entire Indian Ocean.
It's definitely a situation worth watching closely.
It is.
And what about the Andaman and Nicobar Islands? Those are controlled by India, right?
That's right. They're strategically located
Okay.
at the junction of the Bay of Bengal and the Andaman Sea.
That gives India the ability to monitor traffic through the Strait of Malacca.
Right.
That crucial global trade route we were talking about.
Exactly. And India is making significant investments in military infrastructure on those islands.
Okay.
A new naval base, upgraded airfields, and surveillance systems. It's a clear signal that they're preparing for the possibility of conflict.
So you have China flexing its muscles, the U.S. strengthening alliances,
Yeah.
and regional players like India bolstering their defenses.
Right.
It's a complex picture, to say the least.
It is.
And then you have countries like Indonesia trying to navigate their relationship with China.
Indonesia is an interesting case. You might recall the incident back in 2019 where an Indonesian patrol ship confronted a Chinese Coast Guard vessel.
Right, yeah.
In disputed waters.
Tensions were high.
But in recent years, there's been a shift,
Okay.
driven partly by China's massive investments. Indonesia and China are now trying to strengthen cooperation.
So Indonesia,
Yeah.
like many Southeast Asian nations, is wary of China's assertiveness,
Right.
but also recognizes the economic benefits.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a tough balancing act.
It is. Indonesia is trying to maintain its sovereignty while also capitalizing on China's economic might.
It's a delicate dance
It is.
with all these competing interests and simmering tensions.
Yeah.
Is there any hope for a peaceful resolution?
Well, there have been these ongoing efforts to establish a code of conduct for the South China Sea,
Oh, yeah.
involving China and the Aegean countries.
That sounds promising. Could you elaborate on that?
The aim is to create a framework
Okay.
for managing maritime disputes and reducing the risk of conflict. However, these talks have been dragging on for over 2 decades.
2 decades?
Yeah,
That's a long time to be working on something so crucial.
it is.
Why has it been so difficult to make progress?
Well, despite everyone claiming to want a peaceful resolution,
Right.
there's a lot of mistrust
Okay.
between the parties. There are disagreements over core issues like territorial claims and resource rights.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, none of the countries involved want to be seen as backing down.
So even though they're talking,
Yeah,
the underlying tensions are still very real.
absolutely. It's a delicate situation, and any misstep could have serious consequences.
competing interests in the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah.
And before the break, we touched on how countries like Indonesia are trying to navigate their relationship with China.
Right.
It's a real balancing act,
It is.
trying to maintain their sovereignty
Right.
while also capitalizing on China's economic might.
It's a delicate dance. And it's not just Indonesia. A lot of countries in the region are in a similar position.
Right.
They want to benefit from China's economic growth, but they're also wary of its growing military power and political influence.
Amidst all this talk about China and the U.S.,
Yeah.
where does India fit into all of this?
Right.
You mentioned them earlier.
Yeah.
They're a pretty significant player in the region.
Absolutely. India is the world's largest democracy and a rising economic power in its own right.
Yeah.
They have a long history of engagement in the Indo-Pacific
Right.
and are becoming increasingly concerned about China's assertive behavior.
Especially considering that they have their own territorial disputes with China,
Exactly.
mainly along their shared Himalayan border.
That border dispute has been a source of tension for decades.
Yeah.
And on top of that, India is also a key member of the Quad.
You mentioned the Quad earlier. Could you remind us what that is and why it's
Yes.
important?
So the Quad is a strategic security dialogue between the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India.
Okay.
It's seen as a way to counter China's growing influence and promote a free and open Indo-Pacific.
So more than just a military alliance.
It is.
Okay.
They cooperate on a range of issues, including maritime security, cybersecurity, infrastructure development,
Wow.
and even pandemic response, like with COVID-19.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It seems like these alliances are evolving and expanding beyond these traditional military partnerships.
Right.
It really highlights how security and economic aspects of the Indo-Pacific are just so intertwined.
They're definitely inseparable.
Yeah,
And speaking of the economic implications,
right.
we can't ignore the role of trade and investment in all of this.
It's a region with some of the busiest shipping lanes,
It is?
some of the most dynamic economies,
Yeah.
and China is a major trading partner
Absolute.
for almost every country in the Indo-Pacific.
That's the crux of the dilemma.
Right.
A lot of these countries are trying to balance their security concerns with their economic interests when it comes to China.
It must be a tough spot to be in,
Yeah.
especially for smaller nations who might feel pressured to choose sides.
It's a real dilemma, and it's not just about choosing between the U.S. and China either.
Right.
There are many other players in the Indo-Pacific,
Yeah.
each with their own agendas and priorities.
It sounds like a multi-dimensional chess game
It is.
with a lot of moving pieces.
That's a great way to put it, and remember, the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah.
The decisions made by these major powers will have a ripple effect,
Mm-hmm.
shaping not only the future of the Indo-Pacific, but also the world.
So we've covered the geography,
Right.
the major players,
Mm-hmm.
the alliances, the tensions, and the economic implications.
Yeah.
What does it all mean?
Right.
Where is this all headed?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Well,
Yeah.
more like a multi-trillion-dollar question,
Yeah. Yeah.
considering the economic value of the region.
It's hard to predict the future,
Right.
but one thing is for sure.
Okay.
The Indo-Pacific is a region in constant flux.
Okay.
The old order is breaking down,
Yeah.
and a new one is emerging.
What will this new order look like?
That's the big unknown.
Yeah.
How this new order takes shape will depend on a multitude of factors.
Okay.
The strategic choices made by these major powers,
Mm-hmm.
the role of smaller nations,
Right.
and the evolution of global economic and technological trends.
So for the average person, like myself,
Yeah.
what should we be paying attention to in the coming years?
There are several key trends to keep an eye on.
Okay.
First, watch how China's ambitions evolve.
Okay.
Will they continue to pursue an assertive foreign policy,
Right.
or will they move towards a more cooperative approach?
What about the U.S.?
Well, that leads us to the second trend to watch: the strength of U.S. alliances.
Okay.
Can the U.S. maintain its network of partnerships in the face of China's growing influence?
That makes sense. What else should we be looking at?
Third, pay attention to the role of new technologies.
Okay.
How will advancements in artificial intelligence, hypersonic weapons, and cyber warfare impact the balance of power?
Those are some serious game changers.
They are.
Yeah.
And finally, consider the impact of climate change.
Okay.
The Indo-Pacific is highly vulnerable to rising sea levels, extreme weather events,
Right.
and resource scarcity.
Yeah.
How will these challenges affect regional stability and cooperation?
It's a lot to consider.
It is.
The future of the Indo-Pacific is far from certain.
It is.
Yeah.
This region is a microcosm of the global challenges and opportunities
Right.
we face in the 21st century.
Mm.
There are so many factors at play.
Yeah.
Predicting the outcome is nearly impossible.
So we've explored the power dynamics, the strategic calculations, the
Yeah.
economic interests, but we can't forget about the human element.
Right.
What about the people who live in the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah.
How are they affected by all of this?
That's a critical point. We can't overlook the people who live and work in this region.
Yeah.
Their lives are directly affected by these geopolitical shifts.
Right.
We're talking about billions of people,
Mm-hmm.
each with their own culture, language, and aspirations.
Their voices and their
Yeah.
perspectives need to be heard.
Absolutely. There's a growing recognition that sustainable security in the Indo-Pacific requires more than just military alliances and economic partnerships.
Okay.
It also demands addressing issues like human rights, poverty, inequality, and environmental degradation.
It sounds like true stability
Yeah,
in the Indo-Pacific
Yeah.
requires a holistic approach
absolutely.
that considers not just the interests of states,
Right.
but also the well-being of the people.
Exactly. We need to move beyond just this narrow focus on geopolitics
Okay.
and embrace a more inclusive vision for the future of the region.
A vision where cooperation
Yeah,
and shared prosperity
Well,
are
I think-
prioritized over competition and conflict.
exactly. It's a tall order, but the stakes are too high to ignore the human dimension.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
Power dynamics, strategic calculations, economic interests, and the human element of the Indo-Pacific. If you had to boil it all down,
Yeah.
what are the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, the Indo-Pacific is a dynamic and complex region undergoing a profound transformation.
Right.
China's rise is reshaping the geopolitical landscape,
Yeah.
creating both opportunities and challenges for everyone.
So what's next?
Well, the U.S. is working hard to maintain its influence and alliances,
Okay.
but they're facing intense competition from China and other emerging powers.
Right.
Regional players like India, Japan, Australia, and Indonesia are all trying to navigate this delicate balance, securing their own interests while managing the risk of escalation.
Sounds like the future of the region hangs in the balance.
It does, and perhaps most importantly, the future of the Indo-Pacific will be shaped not only by the actions of states, but also by the voices and choices of the people who call this region home.
That's a powerful thought.
Yeah.
It reminds us that even in the realm of geopolitics, it's ultimately about people, their
Yeah.
livelihoods,
Right.
and futures are all intertwined with the decisions made by leaders and the forces shaping this dynamic region.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back after a quick break to discuss what all of this means for you and how you can stay informed and engaged with the Indo-Pacific. So we've been exploring, the complexities of the Indo-Pacific, this region at the center of so much global attention.
Right.
And you might be thinking, okay, this is all fascinating, but what does it have to do with me?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's a valid question.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the Indo-Pacific isn't some, far-off isolated region.
Right.
It's deeply interconnected with the rest of the world. What happens there has a ripple effect that we all feel, even if we don't realize it.
Can you give us some concrete examples?
Sure.
How could this impact our everyday lives here?
Absolutely. Take the global economy, for instance.
Okay.
The Indo-Pacific is a major engine of global trade.
Right.
Disruptions to trade routes or supply chains in the region could lead to higher prices for everyday goods,
Okay.
shortages of essential products, and even economic slowdowns that hit close to home.
So that new phone I've been saving up for, or even that cup of coffee I enjoy every morning,
Right.
those could be affected by instability in the Indo-Pacific.
Exactly. And it's not just consumer goods.
Right.
The Indo-Pacific is a critical source of energy,
Yeah.
raw materials and technology that powers industries around the world.
Right.
Any disruption to these flows could have a significant impact on global markets and industries,
Yeah.
leading to uncertainty and volatility.
And what about cybersecurity?
Yeah.
With, the rise of cyber warfare and espionage, how could events in the Indo-Pacific affect us digitally?
Cybersecurity is a huge concern.
Yeah.
Cyber attacks originating from or targeting the Indo-Pacific could disrupt critical infrastructure,
Right.
financial systems, and even elections,
Wow.
impacting everything from our personal data
Yeah.
to the functioning of governments.
So we're talking about potential economic impacts,
Yeah.
security risks, and even threats to our digital lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's starting to feel a lot closer to home now.
It is, and then there's the human dimension, which we can't overlook.
Right.
The Indo-Pacific is home to billions of people.
Yeah.
Conflicts or instability in the region could lead to humanitarian crises, refugee flows,
Right.
and even the spread of extremism, all of which have global implications.
It's a reminder that we're all interconnected.
We are.
Peace and prosperity in one part of the world is essential for peace and prosperity everywhere.
Absolutely.
So given all this, what can we do about it?
Yeah.
How can we, as individuals, stay informed and engaged with this region that's so crucial to the future?
Well, the first step is to stay informed.
Okay.
Read reputable news sources, follow experts and analysts on social media,
Right.
and listen to podcasts like this one.
Of course.
The more you understand the complexities of the region,
Yeah.
the better equipped you'll be to make sense of events as they unfold.
Right. Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
But beyond staying informed, are there ways we can actively engage with the Indo-Pacific?
Absolutely. You can support organizations that are working to promote peace, development, and human rights in the region.
Okay.
Advocate for policies that prioritize diplomacy and cooperation over military escalation. And if you have the opportunity, travel to the region.
Yeah.
Experience those diverse cultures firsthand.
Yeah.
And connect with the people who call it home. Building bridges of understanding is more important now than ever before.
I love that it's a reminder that even amidst, geopolitical complexities, there are these opportunities for individual action and connection.
Absolutely, there really are. It's about recognizing our shared humanity.
Right.
And working together to create a more peaceful and prosperous future for everyone.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive
It has.
into the Indo-Pacific, a region brimming with potential, but also grappling with some serious challenges.
It is.
And it's clear that what happens in the Indo-Pacific affects us all.
It does.
It's a region that demands our attention,
Yeah.
our understanding,
Absolutely.
and our engagement.
Right.
The decisions made in the coming years will shape the future of the Indo-Pacific, and by extension, the world for generations to come.
They will.
So to our listeners,
Yeah.
stay curious.
Absolutely.
Stay informed and stay engaged.
Yes.
The Indo-Pacific is a story that's still being written,
It is.
and we all have a role to play in shaping its outcome.